Hello, everybody. I am hopefully going to share a screen with you. And so far, so good. Just got to that slide. Okay, so the first thing that I want to cover is just a few contemporary things going on in China. They man, oh man, they're still continuing to have a problem with banking. And debt, and very weak. And there's even concern that China might lose a decade, like Japan did. Lost to deflation. And curiously, Xi Jinping is kind of tight. He's stingy. He doesn't believe in stimulus. He believes in suck it up, like I did during the Cultural Revolution. And so they're not doing this countercurrent spending this time around, this Keynesian idea that you just can't let things drift into deflation territory. So the Economist is giving them advice, but she's following his instincts, which are just the opposite of Erdogan's instincts. I forgot to fix this. So the Belt and Road Initiative, you see superimposed, has had some up and downs, and it's now 10 years old. They're trying to have a little celebration. But the things that we've learned is there's very little aid in Silk Road. So she's not giving away money, just like he doesn't want to do it for his own citizens. He's not doing it abroad. And besides, the countries that are signed up are mostly wealthy. Half of them are above the median. And so he's creating a digital Silk Road, which The Economist describes as a fancy way of pursuing business abroad by Chinese companies, both state and private. Remember, there's a lot of state-sponsored businesses, so mercantilism. And especially in the area of telecommunications and cloud computing. And Huawei, by the way, just this week rolled out some new super duper cell phone that goes to 5G, whatever that is. Creating the Silk Road, the actual target is a propaganda target. This is the argument that the West could make, that all these things, the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, the Global Civilization Initiative, are all concepts designed to appeal to the psychology of developing countries. And the subliminal or not so subliminal message is that China's development model is better than the West. You're not going to get any lectures about human rights from us, of course not, given the Uyghurs. By the way, Western military alliances threaten world peace, as we see in Ukraine, as we saw in Vietnam, as we saw in Laos and Cambodia. And we'll get close to Laos in just a second. And that anytime the West criticizes Chinese communism, it's really racist, a racist attack. And you people that are sidling up to America, just understand you'll never be Western. Your eyes will always be slanted. I'm not kidding. The foreign chief foreign diplomat said that, and we've met him before. By the way, he talked this week with Jake Sullivan in Malta, and I think they had a pretty good talk. So maybe he won't be saying that again. That's 3 months old. So. And anything that doesn't recognize the greatness of China's ancient culture is racist. So an interesting development with China is their binding with Pakistan. So Pakistan up here. And what's in it for China to be giving Pakistan all this aid and build a Belt and Road initiative that goes right from here all the way down to a place called Gaidar, which is a port in the Indian Ocean, or I forget what body of water that's called. I think it's got a couple of names. Somebody help me out if I've got it wrong. But here, Chinese goods could go out through Kashgar and down and through the Hormuz Straits, and boom, there you are. And what's the advantage of that? It avoids the problem of going through the Malacca Straits. I'll get to that in just a second. There are other ways to avoid getting through there, and you can see the red line. We went with Ramsey and Janet to Kunming and traveled all around southwest China, and went up to Xi'an and left from there. So it was a wonderful trip. And I'm going to give you another angle on that in just a second. But you can see that you can build a pipeline down here through Burma, Myanmar, as we say these days, and they've got a port in Myanmar. So that's another way for China to get goods out and avoid the Malacca.
John, is that not close to the Burma, the Burma Road from World War II?
Yes, absolutely.
So it's been done once before, but by us.
Yes. And I've showed, I don't know if you were in, Bob, when I was talking about World War II, probably not. But some of the original people have seen the photo of the road that we built.
Oh.
It's crazy. I'll see if I can dig it up for next week.
Well, I'll just add one other anecdote. I have been to Kunming, and I'm pretty sure in Kunming there's a fantastic provincial museum with a wonderful exhibition of the what were the sort of private airline that the US used, the Tigers.
That flew over the hump.
Tigers.
Yeah.
That flew over the hump.
Yeah, it's a tremendous exhibition. Anyway, that's all from me.
Well, darn, I've got a connection I can't ignore with that. One of the doctors at the hospital, he's a generation older than I. He's Chinese American. And during World War II, he had been in the forerunner of the CIA and had been flown over the Burma hump and parachuted in Chengdu to help the Chinese organize and fight the Japanese coming that were coming at them from the east. It's quite a yarn. And there were a couple of my mentors at the residency that one got the Silver Star in the Battle of the Bulge. But I digress. Oh, but I'll say one of the talks that I'm giving next month in October, and the reason I'm going to have to cancel 1 week, I talk about I give the history of our hospital and our residency specifically. And I talk about these two guys, and one of them, in fact, was flown over the hump and had to parachute into I think it was Chengdu. It might have been Chongqing, and to fight the Japanese. It's my privilege to get to be taught by the greatest generation. I've got more stories about our hospital and the greatest generation.
John?
Yeah.
Yeah, when we went actually in 67 on my road trip from Singapore to Europe, we drove up the Malayan Peninsula and then had but because you could only get a 24-hour visa in Burma because of the fact that all the roads were, number one, they were a lot of pirates and people that were you probably wouldn't like to have with a flat tire kind of thing. And so we ended up then shipping a car from Penang out to Calcutta across there to avoid that the Burma roads. And Kristen's dad, my wife's dad, he used to fly. He was in Army intelligence, flying in the belly of a bomber over kind of the bridges of Tokori, or the bridges of what was the movie?
Kwai.
River Kwai.
Yeah, through the River Kwai, and he was taking pictures of the bombing there, so they could look and see if they got what they were trying to get. But that whole Japanese theater up there was pretty remarkable.
Yeah. Well, Aiko and I went down in the southern part of Burma, which is interestingly more Muslim than the other parts. And this was the end of the line for that railroad that was being built, and of course, Japan controlled Burma. And that was the whole point. And there was a museum there, and there were memorials to all those British soldiers, Australian soldiers that died building the railroad. Quite remarkable. And then another connection, you talk about pirates. So one of my singing partner, she's a former resident at the hospital, and she's from Cambodia. Her father died in their Holocaust, so she escaped with her mother, and they escaped by boat. And she tells stories of being harassed by pirates all along the way here. And we heard those stories from the Vietnamese boat people, I think. Anyway, so a digression on top of a digression. But that's, that I'm just thinking about what the fun part of history is, making the connections. I'm beginning to think of history more as a giant web that has all these multi connections in all directions, and this was just an example of that. So that's what keeps me going with history. All right, where was I? All right, so
Well, John, a diversion on top of a diversion is a very fine book by George MacDonald Fraser called "Quartered Safe Out Here," referring to his service in Burma in World War II, since you mentioned the hump and the flying tigers. It's a very, very good book. Quartered Safe out here is from the Gunga Din poem that Kipling wrote.
Oh.
So if you want a bird's eye view of that experience in World War II, that's a fine book.
Okay. And I'm sure you'll have occasion later to mention Flashman, but we won't get into that.
Never pass up the chance to mention Flashman.
So, okay, so here's what they're trying to avoid. The Strait of Malacca. And here's a reason. This is one of, I'm sure Pepper will approve of this photo of the Malaccan Strait during their annual bushfires. I think what happens in that part of the world is they intentionally burn the underbrush. And I'm not sure if that relates to all the palm plantations that have recently come up, but it might. Well, anyway, so developing all this to avoid the Malaccan Straits. The trade-off for China is now, you break it, you own it. Pakistan, which is a military disguise itself as a state, is no longer our problem, and they have terrible economic problems. Nor is Afghanistan. Guess whose embassies are being blown up now in Kabul by jihadists? China's, and not by the Taliban, by that other outfit, K-ISIS, because they are heavily Turkic. You understand the difference between ISIS and the Taliban. The Taliban is actually, if you want to go way far back, they're Indo-European. The Persians are Indo-European, and of course the Arabs are not Indo-European, and a lot of ISIS members from Central Asia are Turkic. And so there's no love lost between K-ISIS and China because of the Uyghurs, who are Turkic. So, and now China, they have great ambitions to extract minerals from Afghanistan, which is fabulous in minerals. What's a lapis lazuli is I think one of the first things that we learned when we were doing the history of that part in Afghanistan, and what was of value, this incredibly beautiful blue stone. But they got everything else there in those mountains that make them that create so many valleys that make them hard to govern. That's the problem. Anyway, the Chinese are now the infidels suppressing the Uyghurs. So then I want to also talk about another part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And this is a railroad that they're building down from Kunming. So we've mentioned Kunming a lot, and we were in Kunming with Ramsey. I think we went to that museum. I've been to so many museums with Ramsey, I can't remember. Aiko, can you help me? But in any case, we went by bus. This was 8 years ago. We went by bus from Luang Prabang up through here. And here's the funny thing. We were going with Intrepid, which was a very low cost but adventuresome trip, where we camped out and we bought food at wet markets. Oh boy, we never had any bats. The bus got here, and the guides came up to Aiko and me, and they say, we're in a bind. Our manifest doesn't match the documents that we presented. So we have 2 more people on the bus and then we told China we would be having. And how many of us had to get off the bus and walk? Aiko, do you remember? Was it just you and me?
No, all of us did, didn't we?
No, not Ramsey and Janet. Anyway, we'll work all that out and tell you next week. So we had to go and walk across the border at Botan and watch our bus pass us by. And we just had our documents, but not listed as part of a group. So we held our breath and we made it, no problem, and made it up to Kunming. But now there's a bullet train. So it's really amazing. And I think the reason China's building this train is they want it to connect, Bruce, all the way to Singapore. So anyway, yeah.
I don't know if you saw, but China just announced its train, the hyperbullet train, the Maglev, 573 miles an hour.
Wow.
Faster than a jet. It's going to go from Beijing to what's the big port on the east? Anyway, that was just in the news this week. It's on a magnetic thing. It's got a nose. It's like 35 feet long. 573 miles an hour.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, we could be in LA in an hour. Gee.
Yeah, but
David,
you have to get building permits at 573 miles an hour too.
Yeah.
Now,
Well,
our
they
building permits are lucky if they do 1 mile an hour.
yeah.
Okay.
Are they on the rail? The train is on the rails, or do they levitate?
It levitates. It's got 0 friction.
Wow.
Yeah, but I just saw that. I mean, it's their bullet train makes us look like snails.
Yeah, really. Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, this section, nearly half of the track is in tunnels, and we saw that the number of highways that disappeared into tunnels, let alone railroad tunnels. So this all started just this year. And instead of being a bumpy ride, now you can get on, and farmers have begun to plant high value crops, including durians. Oh man, who in this group has had a durian, a fruit? It's like you peel it.
Absolutely. It's banned on most airplanes, I believe.
It smells. It's awful. And here we're on a converted Mercedes bus, that military bus that set 30 people, and somebody opened a durian and we almost strangled him and threw him off the bus. So the article says the U.S. dropped bombs in Laos. China builds airways. Well, we experienced that directly. All the bombs that were dropped in Laos. I was sitting in a museum, and a group of Germans, tourists, were being shown around. I think, did I mention this already? I'm sorry if I did, if I'm repeating. But they had taken some of our bomb casings and used the fins as the base of a planter. So they cut the cartridge in half, and they used them as planters. And the guide was taking this group of Germans around, and he didn't know that I'd be understanding German. And he said, "Oh, yes, and these flower pots are a beautiful gift that the Americans left us." Well,
John, by the way, what's BRI?
A Belt and Road Initiative.
No.
It's changed over time, and curiously, the belt referred to ships, water-based travel, and road was. I might have that backwards. Road might have referred to ships, and belt referred to road. Yeah, I think that's the confusion, but it's just BRI now. Anyway,
John, I think that I've got a statistic that something like that there was more bombs dropped on Laos than all of World War II.
yeah, Aiko's got that statistic at her fingertips. I've heard it a lot.
Yeah, and the other thing that what was happening in Laos, at least when we were there, is the amount of mines and how many people have lost their limbs due to all of these little cluster bombs that were just sprinkled around left by what do they call them, cluster bombs, I guess, that are just dropped into space, and the kids pick them up and
yeah, well, and here's the thing, Ramsey and Janet, they're always fun to travel with because they do their research, and they found out that there was a museum that was associated with an Australian NGO that was bringing in mine detectors and technicians and demining as many fields as they could. I can't remember the statistics or their progress, but the museum, it was just a small little museum. We were the only ones there that day, I think, or maybe there was another car that Ramsey and Janet took us to. Yeah, it was quite something, and you can see that America drops bombs. We're big brother, and you can learn from us. That strikes a chord. It surely does.
Just to the side, John, MSNBC, I think, and it might have been PBS, had a segment on a new approach to detecting mines. Instead of people walking through fields at great danger to themselves with mine detectors, these people are testing a system whereby drones fly over a field and can identify and mark the location of all kinds of ordnance, including mines, which will tremendously speed the clearing of mines from the fields in Ukraine after the Russians are driven out. Which was the focus of this story. But that's a technological advance that could make a difference for lots of countries.
Well, that brings to mind, and I'm sorry, this is in bad taste, but irresistible, a tongue-in-cheek suggestion that was being made at the height of the mad cow scare in Britain. And some English wag said, "Hey, why don't we load all the cows that we need to call and send them to areas that have a lot of mined fields to solve two problems at once. I told you it was in bad taste. I warned you. You didn't have to listen. All right. So to change the subject, I can go to something a little more entertaining and get us away from minefields. Unless does anybody else want to have anything more to say about what we've
Well,
been?
I do have a point to make. Perhaps you didn't bring it up. Pakistan has the atomic bomb or nuclear weapons, as does India. And I don't know how that figures into all of this. And China does.
Yeah, it doesn't. If you had two secular countries with bombs, that's one thing. Like America and Russia, godless Russia. But if you have two countries that are susceptible to religious extremists, and we see that in Pakistan, certainly, with their version of the Taliban, assassinating politicians like Bhutto and the daughter. And India, which, wait a minute, Gandhi, he was tolerant. They were kind of secular, but they ain't secular anymore. The crazy Hindu sect that assassinated Gandhi overlaps with a lot of the officials that have made it to the top in Modi's party. And Modi, if you look at his biography, he was, as a kid, he was a member of a far right a group of young pioneers as you could find. So that is very worrisome to have religious zealots with atom bombs. So, man, we need a little relief. So let me start and see if the Monkey King can bring us up a little bit. Unless anybody else have anything. I don't want to cut off anybody. Okay, so the Monkey King, this caught my eye. A review of the 400-year-old Chinese superhero, and now in a new Netflix film. And here's their cartoonist rendition of the Monkey King. But talk about connections. Aiko and I have, I don't know, a couple of dozen connections to this concept of the Monkey King, and I'll try to present these connections briefly. But as the article says, the Monkey King is one of China's most successful cultural exports. Well, if you go back and look at the last 400 years, it surely is. And so what is this Chinese character that spread to the West? And just like many of our fictional heroes, many of our Anglophiles, like Rudy and me and Homer, probably a few of you other out there, Aiko, we surely know King Arthur, and we've brought our grandkids up on that myth. Also, some overlap. He's got some superpowers like Harry Potter and Batman. Like a lot of them, unhappy childhood. Came from a rock, under a rock on a mythical mountain. But he pairs all these fighting skills with mischief, and so you got a lot of material to work with. he's fought all kinds of demons and is searching for immortality. So the original story, the myth, is 400 years old. You're going to see it goes back almost a millennium earlier than that. But you see the phrase "journey to the West," "journey to the West," and this was the novel written in 1592 that puts in this irreverent character who's quite capable of urinating in the palm of Buddha. And he's traveling with a monk. And lo and behold, he can talk to the monk. And the charm of this story has lived on. Chinese children all grow up with this story, as did Xi Jinping. Okay. Hello, Mr. President. And this little kid is holding up a little statue of the Monkey King. And now it's hoisted so you get a better view of the statue. And Xi Jinping uses that as an icebreaker. I think this is with a group of children from Xinjiang. And so he grew up on the Monkey King, and so did Obama. What? Obama? He's not Buddhist. So when would Obama have had a chance to be exposed to the Monkey King? Well, I remember reading in his autobiography his description of driving from the airport into Jakarta and looking up a 6-year-old in a strange country, pulled out of Hawaii, and looking up and seeing a statue of a monkey. And a Monkey King was named Lord Hanuman, which is the Hindu representation. So the Monkey King starts off as a Buddhist, the companion of a Buddhist monk, but he winds up in the Hindu mythology as well. And Obama, as a kid, eventually got his Monkey King figurine. What our kids carry around now is Legos figures. And so this is, we think, the statue that he saw. And he was a god from the Ramayana, which is Hindu. But wait a minute, Indonesia is a Muslim country. Well, they've allowed some Hindu things to survive. And you all know which island of Indonesia where Hinduism has survived the most, right?
Bali.
There you go. And so there's much overlap between Hinduism and in Thailand, for instance. You get this strange mix of Hinduism and Buddhism in their for instance, their coronation of their king. He's got Brahmin duties as well as he has Buddhist duties. It's very, very interesting. And And so we think this is probably the statue. I forget who was helping me. Oh, it was Steve James, Iko. He helped me with this because he'd been stationed in Jakarta. So there you go. Some refer to him as the 7-Up man. In Bali, he's everywhere. And the reason for that, the Sufi missionaries came down in I think the 12th, 13th centuries, and they were great missionaries, but they were primarily traders, so they could offer a package deal. You know, if you become a Muslim, we'll make you one of our outlets for our Muslim goods. And that was the mechanism which the Sufi missionaries were so successful throughout Southeast Asia. And then Chinese soft power. So, of course, they've got their modern comic book characters and films and their own Lego toys. Japan's got the manga version called Dragon Ball, and even a Chinese Saturday morning show featuring him. And then out came all the gaming franchises. So Monkey King is alive and well in video games, and the story is always a sort of Shakespearean struggle for the protagonist's soul, which we also saw, of course, in with Luke Skywalker and Star Wars. Remember the Force, Luke. And so the Monkey King is not just a physical journey, it's a mental one too. Way too busy, but if you go on to Wikipedia, you'll get a chance to see all the allusions to it. And for our purposes, Berkeley Rep and Homer and Jenny and I go to Berkeley Rep together. We've seen a lot of Berkeley Rep, and they put up a journey to the West. And this is Mary Zimmerman, who is absolutely great at putting up ancient legends on the stage. The one we remember the most was the Argonauts, the story of Jason and the Golden Fleece and Medea smushed together. If anybody asks me a question about it, I'll answer it. Just searching all over this great internet that we've got, I say, I want to see it again. I want to see it. And this outfit in Connecticut taped their show and put it up. So you can see it. The sound isn't good enough for me to want to watch the whole thing, but it's there. And it's had various revivals. And so you can see what the monkey looks like in various forms. The stories are always playful and fun, and after all, you're actually following a historical event, which I'm going to tell you in more detail what it was in just a second. And then in America, there was something called American-born Chinese graphic novel. I haven't seen that, but it was turned into a Disney TV series. And here's Monkey King here. So really lives on. Each version is a mirror of its time because there's always some inner voice. And who's that inner voice reacting to? Well, probably reacting to the powers that be. in the hands of the West, we always want to see democracy come into play, but it's flexible enough that it even thrived in communist China. That they weren't foolish enough to try to snuff out the Monkey King myth, even as they tried to snuff out Confucianism. And Mao, he liked the Monkey King because Monkey King challenged the hierarchy. And Monkey King was a wrecking ball battling the forces of tradition. And Monkey, of course, has working class wisdom. And Mao recast the Monkey King as the Monkey King rebels against the more traditional immortals. There's like 8 immortals that you see around Asia. And Monkey King rebels against these eight immortals. What was the name of that big park that had 8 statues to the immortals, Heiko, in Japan? Anyway, they're it's all over the place. This is throughout Asia. It may have been originally a Chinese monk, but it's everywhere. The animated version, you'd think, this is perfect. It'll be like Mulan. Remember the Disney production of the Chinese girl who has her adventure. And this should transcend national boundaries, just like Mulan did. And that was in 1968. But guess what? The times have changed since 1968. And now perhaps the current version is too pseudo-Freudian, too navel-gazing, as The Economist phrased it. Netizens from China say, look how it stereotypes ancient China, all the traditional buildings. Yeah, well, so did Mulan. And besides, they own the Netflix only put in the first 7 chapters, Monkey's Bid for Eternal Life. There were other 93 chapters that had messages that would have been more supportive for what we want to say. Oh, come on. So with in China, with the current atmosphere, netizens have dismissed it as being too Western. And yet another trivializing of Asia as a mysterious power of the East. And maybe it's just as well Netflix is not available in China. So the actual history is fascinating. Buddhism came from India before the Tang Dynasty. And I see it's 3, and I've got, I think, 5 minutes at least, unless anybody has to go, I would understand. I'm just going to make it a complete hour. So it actually made it from India to China. They were Indian Buddhist monks. And this was during the Kushan Empire that Ramsey talks about. The Kushans were the last Indo-Europeans coming out of the steppe. After that, it was all Turkic, speaking Almaic languages. But the Kushans spoke an Indo-European language, and they controlled the Silk Road. So Indian Buddhists who had been around after all for 700 years traveled and walked to China. And this is before the Tang Dynasty, which is in 600 CE. And so how did they walk? Here's the thing. They either came up through the Khyber Pass and maybe cut up through Pakistan and Kashgar, or there's a very windy jungle trail here called the Horse and Tea Trail, but you can't get more than one horse to pass it in some places. We saw the beginning of that when we were in Kunming. But so that was rarely used because of this huge jungle area. So probably came up and across here and then down through the Khyber Pass. So that's what possibly the Khyber Pass looked like. Formidable but doable, right? And this is the Khyber Pass when we were using it to fight the Taliban. So who was this original guy in the year 600? I'll at least get him started and then we'll stop. So he has many different names, which means that I haven't mastered any single one of them. But Zhuan Tsang will get you perhaps some recognition. And these are the possible paths that he took from Xi'an. Now, in those days, it was called Chang'an, but Xi'an today, up and across Liangzhou, where Aiko and I have been. Jeremy's been all the way out here to Turfan. We have friends who went through Kashgar and visited all these places and then came back with his knowledge. And that trip has been part of China proud history forever. And the Wild Goose Pagoda in Xi'an is where you go to pay homage to this monk from 600 AD. And we were there with Ramsey and Janet. And so we've walked around the base of the statue as well. And so this guy inspired a lot of concepts in folk religion, Chinese mythology, even Confucianism absorbed the legend, as did Taoism. And I think the Taoism is the immortals, the eight immortals that you can also see 8 Buddhist bodhisattvas in Japan. So then the novel came along and was used to satirize Chinese bureaucracy and bring up the possibility of the spirit and achieving some kind of wisdom. So it's everywhere. The Monkey King has other fantasy kings, a horse, a pig. I think the pig can fly, so I think the flying pigs comes up. So just whipping through the calligraphy. A lot of it is of the Monkey King and the associated characters. Here he is in the various guise. He's in Chinese opera, and okay, all the rest of this is just gilding the lily. So I'll stop and take questions and entertain comments.
Well, I will just say I feel connected to history today because my father was in the war in the Army Air Force. At the time, he was a navigator and flew the hump. And he's no longer around. So I haven't, the stories I heard when I was little are just too far away, but I know that was quite an adventure for him. And then Hanuman sits beside our front door, and he has been either outside or inside a statue that we brought from Bali. I don't know, probably in the early 90s or the 80s sometimes. So anyway, thank you for bringing Hanuman.
All honor to your grandfather. Flying the hump was very risky.
Yeah. And Homer's father was in the Air Force, so he knows of which he speaks.
Yeah, he was a test pilot. He flew a lot of downed enemy aircraft to see how they performed. If you mind a digression, have you heard of the Aleutian Zero? It was a pretty nearly intact Zero that crashed in the Aleutians, and the Americans recovered before the Japanese could destroy it. So my dad and many other test pilots flew it to discover what made it such an effective aircraft and what were its weaknesses. Its weaknesses were many. It was very fast, very quick, very dangerous, but had almost no armor. And the gas tank was right behind the pilot. So it did not take a punch well, although it could deliver a punch. Also, when it dove, it rattled badly and only could pull out to the right, couldn't pull out to the left. So these were good things to know if you were in a battle against the Zero. And so Dad was one of the people who found that out. And he was in many of the different theaters of the war because there were many different enemy aircraft to test. But the hump was an especially dangerous flight.
Another interesting thing too is that Julia Childs was in the early version of the CIA as in the secretarial pool, working during the war near the Burma Chinese border.
Oh, really?
Indian border. Yeah.
Are you familiar?
What?
Are you familiar with kirtan? Kirtan. It's basically a call and response type of prayer chants. It's Hindu oriented. Are you familiar at all with the musician Jayutal? Any chance? And oftentimes he talks a lot about Hanuman and as far as some of the Hanuman stories that are told through the kirtan, and so at some point in time, he's actually a musician. I think he has called the Pagan Love Orchestra, and they often play in Berkeley at Freight and Salvage, and if you've never heard it, it's really quite remarkable. We've enjoyed it over the years.
Well, the interesting thing is when we were in Luang Prabang, that first old provincial capital, and we had to take a bus across. Where now they've got that high speed train. That Laos is a Buddhist, just like Vietnam was, but curiously enough, at the old royal palace, one of the nights they were there, they were performing the Ramayana. The Ramayana, which is the Hindu epic.
Right.
And Hanuman is a big guy. He's helping Lord Rama try to get his wife back. You know, just like Ulysses was helping Agamemnon to try to get Helen back in the Iliad, whose author carried Homer's name. And Homer has promised us, by the way, at some point to deliver his take on the Iliad. But I digress. And
there's a new translation of the Iliad. It was featured in last week's New Yorker. A woman has translated in, she writes it in iambic pentameter, but using sort of modern English. It just doesn't have archaic sound to it. You might want to read that. I want to read her translation. I read the article about her. She sounds interesting. Yeah, good stories, worth retelling and rereading.
Yes, yes. And Michael's got a story.
Well, this is just like you know, history and all the sort of interesting things. I'm interested in aviation history, and I found out one of the reasons during World War II, the plane, the C-46 Commando, the Curtiss-Wright Commando, flew the hump was it was pressurized. The DC-3 was not pressurized and could not fly the hump. So you never would see pictures of the C-47 flying over the Himalayas because they had to go up above whatever it is, 30,000 feet.
You never see a DC-3 flying the hump, you meant.
Right, DC-3.
You would see a C-47, but not a DC-3.
No. C-47 and a DC-3 are one and the same. It was the military version of the DC-3. The DC-3 couldn't.
The C-47 was pressurized.
No, it wasn't. It was
which was pressurized?
The C-46, the Commando, made by Wright. The DC-3 was made by Douglas. But the point was, if any airplane that had to fly the hump had to be pressurized, and it was just a little fact I found out about. Like John says, you go down a rabbit hole and you find out these things.
Yeah. So, well, Sonia, you're getting a lot of good information about World War II here.
Well, it was extremely interesting, especially the stories about the hump. We spent some time in Kunming too. And at one evening, I know we were entertained by a little orchestra that had played for the flyers back then. And they were quite elderly by the time we heard them.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
It was fun.
I love it. Bob, it looked like you had something to say.
No, I was just nodding in awe of all these anecdotes.
Yeah, you come here and you find out about airplanes flying the hump, man.
But I know time is running away from us, but you wanted digressions. Who was the wife of the guy who created the flying tigers, and what conspiracy did she end up involving herself in?
Ooh.
Was that Chenault, who's the commander?
Yes. Anne Chenault was then became very active 30 years later 20 years later in the Republican Party. And I think she was involved in the conspiracy to avoid any sort of peace negotiations till after Nixon was elected.
Oh boy.
Ah. Wow, there's a connection. That's a great connection. That'll go down in connection history. Okay.
What was her name?
Anne Chenault, much younger than Claire Chenault. I don't know where he met her, but she was a gorgeous woman, and that's their story. But later on, she came to the United States, and by 1968, the North Vietnamese wanted some negotiations going on, but somehow between Nixon and Kissinger and Anne Chenault, they delayed any suspicion that peace might be at hand. They wouldn't want that going into the election in 1968.
No.
All right. Okay, guys. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
This was a fun session.
Thanks.
Well
Bye.
done.
See you next
Bye.
week.
Homer, stick around.
Okay.